So that is a red herring that some election deniers have been tossing out there. In a way, everything is vulnerable to hackers. Our 911 centers, our banks, our credit cards, all of that. And yet, the federal government and state governments have been working really hard to make sure that our elections are secure. And I know that in Maryland and I believe in every other state, we are making sure that there's no connection to the internet, and that's the easiest way of hacking in. And so as long as we are doing things internally and through thumb drives and internal scanners and stuff, I believe that our elections are really safe.
Anything that involves technology is going to be susceptible to interference, and that's just life as we know it now. Now, here in Missouri, we have done a really good job so far as putting a great emphasis on cybersecurity as well as election security. And I was just at a conference, as I described, and one CISA was there, and they talked about all the things that the 116 election authorities here in Missouri can work in tandem to ensure that the standards are met, have relationships with the other local elected officials, and just make sure that any policy that we provide, that they follow through.
The problem in Maryland and frankly around the country is disinformation and misinformation. People handing out phony data, phony information about where to vote, when to vote, or most egregiously, that there are problems or that somehow the election results aren't accurate. That is such an enormous way of undercutting our democracy and people's confidence in our elections. To combat the misinformation and disinformation that might be out there, one of the things that we do here in Maryland is have the State Board of Elections manage all of the marketing materials and the information and the relationships with the TV and radio stations, put out the facts, and then that kind of drips down to our 24 local boards of elections. And so they have stuff they don't have to pay for, it's accurate, and then they can help roll it out in their communities.
You know, it's hard to combat bad information and inaccurate information because it seems like the press likes to stir the pot and keep people wound up. And so here in Missouri, our local election authorities work together and do an outstanding job to make sure the local communities know that there's confidence and credibility in the elections, and they're welcome to come and observe. As a matter of fact, we're a bipartisan state, so the larger jurisdictions have a Democrat and a Republican that work in tandem for St. Louis, Kansas City, and the large jurisdictions. And so everything is done in a bipartisan fashion.
In Maryland, we're really welcoming, and we want everyone who is eligible to cast a ballot. We make it easy, whether you want to vote by mail, which we've expanded, whether you want to early vote, whether you want to vote on election day. We even allow, and frankly, it's a challenge, but internet delivered ballots, which are complicated. But for someone who suddenly has to fly out of town and can't go and vote in person, we want them to be able to vote.
Well, first and foremost, Missouri does have a voter ID law, and that passed in 22. And it's mostly used the person's driver's license. And so the poll pads accept the barcode on the back. And so I think that people who don't have a photo ID, they are still able to vote through provisional ballot. If they show up without the valid photo ID and they're registered in the poll book, they vote provisionally and their signatures checked against the election system. And again, bipartisan teams look at it. Sometimes our League of Women Voters is involved in some of the matches and watching the signatures. So here in Missouri, no one's turned away from the polls.
That's not a question that's relevant in Maryland. We have early voting. We currently have 8 days. Vote by mail, it used to be called absentee voting. It's now vote by mail, and it is an option. You don't need an excuse. You don't need to be out of state or busy with a work project. You just can prefer to vote around the kitchen table, and that's easier for you. You might have a disability. You might want to vote with your family, and all of that is easy in Maryland.
Well, I think we need to find the sweet spot in anything else. Is it too much? Is it too little? And so Missouri passed a law in 22 in that large omnibus bill that allowed for 10 days in person, no excuse absentee. And it has really been a great thing for turnout. And we all wish that people would turn out. So this extension of voting was used in November of 22. It gave voters the options who opposed only voting on election day, the chance to come early.
So I had legislation to protect our poll workers, our election workers, because we've seen a spike in the threats, the intimidation, the harassment. It's terrible. And I was delighted when my governor, Wes Moore, stole my bill from me and sponsored it himself. And so it passed. We made it an emergency bill. It passed this year, Senate Bill 480, and was signed into law by the governor. And basically that tells our election workers, we have your back.
I think that as we prepare for elections and talk through the issues, not only our local law enforcement, kind of ginned up from hearing about it from the clerks, state and federal law enforcement agencies now have becoming really involved in the elections. They send out letters in advance telling the clerks and LEAs that they may have, or here's a number to call, here's who the person is if you have any type of threat at all, and call the proper enforcement agency.
Transparency is fundamental to assuring people that their votes are being counted, that they're being counted accurately and fairly. So during COVID, all 24 of our counties live streamed their canvass, the processing of ballots. And people, it wasn't easy to watch because it was kind of far away, and most of it was not exciting viewing. But you can also go to your county and watch them process the ballots.
We, I think, are in the forefront of protecting our election judges, protecting the Secretary of State, as well as the authorities, because we also allow the party observers, the public, the party observers, the bipartisan teams. I mean, sometimes this can be a really busy place, on election day. You have to make sure that everybody knows their place and they're not with, doing anything or taking pictures, cameras, such as that. But I think bringing people in to witness the process is always the best antidote for false information.